The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Maya Chin stood frozen at checkout lane 7, her EBT card trembling between her fingers. The electronic beep that followed wasn't the cheerful confirmation she'd prayed for. It was the sharp, mechanical rejection that made her stomach drop to her worn sneakers. Insufficient funds, the cashier announced, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the busy supermarket like a blade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's cheeks burned crimson as she stared at the modest pile of groceries before her: a loaf of bread, peanut butter, instant noodles, milk that would expire in 3 days but was marked down 50%, and a small container of strawberry yogurt, the one item she'd allowed herself as a tiny luxury. Behind her, the line was growing restless. She could feel their eyes boring into her back, could hear the subtle shuffling of feet and the quiet sighs of impatience. "I'm sorry," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the store's background music. "Could you try it again? Maybe there's a mistake." The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and purple-streaked hair, gave her a look that was part sympathy, part resignation. She'd seen this scene play out countless times before. "Honey, I can run it again, but the system's pretty accurate about these things," she said, her tone gentler now. Maya nodded anyway, clinging to hope like a lifeline. The card reader beeped again. Same result. The rejection felt personal this time, as if the machine itself was judging her worth. Maya's hands shook as she began to calculate which items she could afford to leave behind. The yogurt would have to go first, luxuries always did. Then maybe the milk. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a constant companion these days, but she'd grown accustomed to its persistent gnawing. She was about to speak when a deep, calm voice emerged from behind her in line. "Excuse me, miss. I couldn't help but notice. You're having some trouble. Would you mind if I helped cover your groceries today?" Maya spun around to face the voice, and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to exist in stark contrast to everything around him. Where the store was harsh fluorescent white, he emanated warmth. Where everything felt cold and mechanical, he appeared genuinely human. He was tall, but not imposing, with graying temples that suggested wisdom rather than age, and eyes the color of dark coffee that held no judgment, only kindness. I couldn't possibly," Maya stammered, her pride flaring even as desperation clawed at her chest. "You don't even know me." The man smiled, and something about it reminded Maya of her grandfather, who used to say that kindness was the only currency that multiplied when you spent it. "My name is David Castellanos," he said, extending his hand. "And you're right, I don't know you. But I know what it's like to count every penny and still come up short. I know what it's like to choose between eating and keeping the lights on." Maya stared at his outstretched hand, unsure whether to shake it or run. Behind them, the line had grown longer, but David seemed completely unbothered by the attention they were drawing. His shopping cart was modest but comfortable: fresh vegetables, quality bread, a small bouquet of sunflowers that spoke of someone who still found room for beauty even in routine errands. "I appreciate your kindness," Maya said carefully, "but I can't accept charity from strangers." "It's not charity," David replied, and there was something in his voice that made her look up and really see him. "It's just one person helping another, the way people helped me when I needed it most." The cashier cleared her throat gently. "Folks, I hate to interrupt, but I've got quite a line building here." Maya felt the weight of everyone's stares, felt the familiar shame creeping up her neck like a rash. She was 24 years old, a college graduate with a degree in elementary education, and she couldn't afford $30 worth of basic groceries. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent 4 years learning to nurture young minds, while her own life fell apart piece by piece. "Please," David said quietly, and something in that single word broke through her defenses. "Let me do this. Not because you need charity, but because sometimes we all need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves." Maya's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. She nodded once, barely perceptible, and watched as David stepped forward to hand his credit card to the cashier. The transaction took less than 30 seconds, but it felt like the longest and shortest moment of her life. As they gathered their respective bags, David turned to her once more. There's a coffee shop about 2 blocks from here called Harmony Grounds. Would you join me for a cup? I promise I'm not trying to be anything other than a friend. Maya hesitated. Every instinct told her to politely decline, to disappear into the anonymity of the city streets and pretend this encounter had never happened. But something about David's manner suggested that this offer came from a place of genuine concern rather than pity or ulterior motives. I don't really have anywhere else to be, she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Harmony Grounds turned out to be exactly the kind of place Maya would have loved if she'd had the luxury of frequenting coffee shops. Mismatched furniture gave it character, local artwork covered the walls, and the aroma of freshly ground beans mixed with something that might have been cinnamon bread. David chose a corner table away from the main flow of foot traffic, perhaps sensing that Maya would prefer privacy for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "Coffee's on me," David said as they settled into their chairs. "What would you like?" "Just black coffee is fine," Maya replied automatically. She'd trained herself to want simple things, things that didn't cost extra or require explanation. David returned with 2 steaming mugs and a plate that held a massive blueberry muffin. "They insisted on giving me this," he said with a sheepish grin. "Apparently, I look like I need feeding. Mind sharing it?" Maya accepted a piece of the muffin and found herself tasting something she'd almost forgotten existed. Food eaten for pleasure rather than mere sustenance. The blueberries burst sweet and tart against her tongue, and the cake was soft enough to dissolve like a small miracle. "So," David said, wrapping his hands around his mug. "What's your story, Maya?" She looked up, startled. "I never told you. My name. It was on your card," he explained gently. "Maya Chun. Pretty name. Means illusion in Sanskrit, if I remember correctly." Maya stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I used to teach world religions at the community college," David said. "Retired last year." You pick up interesting bits of information when you spend your days exploring different belief systems. There was something about his manner that invited confession, that made the act of sharing feel safe rather than vulnerable. Maya found herself talking, really talking, for the first time in months. "I graduated from State University 2 years ago," she began. "Elementary education major. I thought I'd be teaching by now, maybe have my own classroom, my own apartment. Instead, I'm living in a studio that's barely bigger than a closet, working 3 part-time jobs that don't add up to enough hours or enough money, and apparently can't even afford groceries." David listened without interrupting, without offering the usual platitudes about how things would get better or how she just needed to keep trying. Instead, he simply absorbed her words like they mattered. "The teaching market is brutal, right now," Maya continued. "Every school wants experience. But how do you get experience if no one will hire you? I substitute teach when they call, but that's maybe 2 days a week if I'm lucky. I work at a bookstore in the evenings and clean offices on weekends, but none of it's enough." She paused to sip her coffee, grateful for something to do with.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Her hands. "My parents think I should move back home to Ohio, but they don't understand. If I give up now, if I run back to the safety of their house, I'll never know if I could have made it on my own." "Independence is important," David agreed. "But so is knowing when to accept help." Maya looked up sharply. "Is that what this is? Help?" "Maybe," David said with a slight smile. "Or maybe it's just 2 people having coffee and getting to know each other. Does it matter which?" They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon light filter through the coffee shop's windows. Maya noticed things about David that she'd missed in the grocery store. The way he held his mug with both hands as if savoring its warmth, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the wedding ring that caught the light when he moved. "What about you?" Maya asked. "What's your story?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "Married 32 years to a woman named Carmen. She passed away 18 months ago. Cancer." He said it simply, without drama, but Maya could hear the weight of grief that still lived in those words. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. "Thank you." She was. She was the kind of person who saw potential in everyone. She taught high school Spanish for 28 years, and she never met a kid she couldn't reach somehow. Even the tough ones, the ones other teachers had given up on. David's eyes grew distant. "She used to say that everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about," So be kind. Always be kind. Maya felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of pride and fear she'd been carrying. She sounds like she was special. She was. And she would have liked you. I think. She always had a soft spot for people who were determined to make their own way in the world. They talked until the coffee shop began to empty, until the baristas started wiping down tables, and the late afternoon had melted into early evening. Maya learned that David had been a professor for 35 years, that he and Carmen had never been able to have children, that he was struggling to figure out what his life looked like without the woman who had been his compass for over 3 decades. I have a confession, David said as they prepared to leave. Meeting you today, being able to help, it reminded me why Carmen always insisted on keeping extra cash in her purse. She said you never knew when you might encounter someone who needed a small miracle. Maya felt tears threatening again. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, David said with a mysterious smile. I have a proposition for you. Outside the coffee shop, the evening air carried the promise of autumn. David turned to face Maya, his expression serious but hopeful. I know this might sound unusual, coming from someone you just met, but I have a spare bedroom in my house. Carmen and I always talked about taking in a boarder after I retired, someone who could use a leg up while getting established. The room has been empty since she died, and honestly, the house feels too quiet without another person around. Maya's mouth fell open. You're offering me a place to live? I'm offering you a fair arrangement, David corrected. Rent would be minimal, just enough to cover utilities and groceries. In exchange, you'd help with some light housekeeping and maybe cook dinner a few nights a week. Carmen always said a house wasn't a home unless someone was cooking in the kitchen. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Maya's first instinct was to refuse. It felt too good to be true, and experience had taught her to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. I don't understand, she said slowly. Why would you do this for someone you don't know? David was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Because Carmen and I were blessed with more than we needed, and we always intended to share that blessing. Because I believe people come into our lives for a reason. And because, he paused, meeting her eyes. I think we might be able to help each other. How could I possibly help you? Maya asked. By bringing life back into a house that's been too sad for too long. By letting an old widower feel useful. Again, by giving me someone to cook for and worry about and care for. His voice grew soft. I miss having someone to come home to, Maya. I miss matching to someone's daily life. Maya felt something break open inside her chest, some wall she'd built to protect herself from disappointment and hurt. Here was this man, this stranger who had become something more in the space of a few hours, offering her not just shelter, but belonging. What if it doesn't work out? She whispered. What if I'm not the person you think I am? Then we'll figure it out as we go, David said simply. But I have a feeling about you, Maya Chun. I think you're exactly the person you're supposed to be. 3 days later, Maya stood in the doorway of what David called the sunroom, holding her few possessions in 2 battered suitcases and a cardboard box. The room was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight with gratitude. Windows on 3 sides that filled the space with natural light. A comfortable bed with a handmade quilt, a small desk positioned to catch the morning sun, and bookshelves that David had filled with novels and poetry collections. Carmen loved this room, David said from behind her. She used to sit here in the mornings with her coffee and her lesson plans. She always said the light helped her think. Maya set down her suitcases and walked to the window. The view looked out over a small garden where late-season roses still bloomed despite the approaching autumn. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. The bathroom is just down the hall, and you're welcome to use any space in the house. Kitchen, living room, the back porch, it's all yours as much as it's mine. That first week passed in a delicate dance of adjustment. Maya and David moved around each other carefully, politely, both trying to gauge the boundaries of their unusual arrangement. Maya cooked simple meals, pasta with vegetables, grilled cheese, and tomato soup, things that required more care than skill, and David proved to be an appreciative audience for even her most basic culinary efforts. You know, he said one evening, as they shared a dinner of baked chicken and rice, I've eaten more home-cooked meals this week than I have in the past year combined. Maya smiled. It's nice cooking for someone again. I'd forgotten how much I missed it. They fell into routines without planning them. David would make coffee each morning and leave a cup for Maya before he headed out for his daily walk. Maya would prepare dinner and leave a plate warming in the oven if David was late returning from his volunteer work at the literacy center. They watched the evening news together, discussed books, played Scrabble on rainy afternoons. It was comfortable in a way that surprised them both. This quiet domesticity between two people who had been strangers just weeks before. Maya found herself looking forward to coming home each day, to the warm lights spilling from the windows and the knowledge that someone would be glad to see her. But it was during Maya's third week in the house that their careful equilibrium was disrupted by an unexpected visitor. Maya was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. David had mentioned he might be late, something about a faculty meeting at the college where he still occasionally guest lectured. So she dried her hands and went to answer the door. The woman standing on the porch was elegantly dressed in a way that suggested both money and taste. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect bob and jewelry that caught the light expensively. Her expression, when she saw Maya, shifted from polite expectation to cool suspicion. "I'm looking for David Castellanos," the woman said. "I'm Margaret Winters, his sister-in-law." Maya felt her stomach drop. "He's not home yet, but he should be back soon. Would you like to come in and wait?" Margaret stepped inside, her gaze taking in the house, with the sharp assessment of someone cataloging changes. "And you are?" "Maya Chun. I rent a room here." "I see." Margaret's tone suggested she saw quite a lot, none of it particularly flattering. "How long have you been living here?" "About 3 weeks." Margaret nodded as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. 3 weeks. "And David never mentioned you when I spoke to him last month." Maya felt heat creep up her neck. "I should probably let him know you're here. Can I get you something to drink while you wait?" "That won't be necessary." They stood in awkward silence until David's key turned in the front door. Maya watched his face change when he saw his sister-in-law standing in the living room, watched him quickly mask surprise with polite welcome. "Margaret, this is unexpected." Clearly, Margaret's voice carried a chill that made Maya want to retreat to her room. "I was in town for a conference and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing." Imagine my surprise when a stranger answered, "Your door." David glanced at Maya, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. "Maya is staying here temporarily. She's been a great help around the house." "I'm sure she has." Margaret's tone suggested help wasn't what she suspected Maya was providing. "David, could we speak privately?" Maya didn't wait to be dismissed. "I'll just be in my room if you need anything," she said, and escaped to the sunroom where she could still hear the murmur of voices from the living room, though not the specific words. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Maya tried to read, tried to grade the few substitute teaching assignments she'd managed to pick up that week. But her attention kept drifting to the voices in the next room. She could tell from the rhythm of the discussion that it was intense, that Margaret was doing most of the talking, that David's responses were getting shorter and more clipped. When Margaret finally left, David knocked softly on Maya's door. "Come in," she called, though she dreaded whatever conversation was about to follow. David entered looking tired in a way that went beyond the simple fatigue of a long day. He sat heavily in the chair by her desk, rubbing his temples. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Margaret can be protective. She means well, but she doesn't always express her concerns diplomatically." "What did she say?" Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. David sighed. "She's worried that I'm being taken advantage of. She thinks I'm not thinking clearly because of grief, that I'm vulnerable to people who might want to exploit my loneliness." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. "Is that what you think?" "No." David's response was immediate and firm. "But I understand why she's concerned. From the outside, this arrangement probably looks unusual." "Maybe she's right," Maya said quietly. "Maybe I am taking advantage." "Maya, look at me." David waited until she met his eyes. "Do you remember what you told me about your parents wanting you to move home?" She nodded. "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed to know. I could make it on my own." "And have you made it on your own?" Maya considered this. In the 3 weeks she'd been living in David's house, she'd picked up more substitute teaching assignments than she had in the previous 2 months. She'd been able to focus on job applications instead of constantly worrying about rent and utilities. She'd eaten regular meals, slept through the night without anxiety, started to feel like herself again. I don't know, she admitted. I feel like I'm making it, but I'm not doing it alone. None of us make it completely alone, David said. Even when we think we are, there are people helping us in ways we might not even recognize. Teachers who believed in us, friends who offered encouragement, strangers who showed us kindness when we needed it most. Maya thought about this. Margaret thinks I'm using you. Margaret thinks everyone is using everyone, David replied with a slight smile. She's been wealthy for so long that she's forgotten what it feels like to genuinely need help. But that doesn't make her a bad person, just insulated. What if she's right, though? What if I am just a sad charity case who's too pathetic to survive on her own? David was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you something about Carmen? Maya nodded. When Carmen was 25, she was struggling to finish her master's degree while working 2 jobs to pay for it. She was exhausted, broke, and ready to give up. Her advisor, Professor Martinez, offered her a research assistant position that came with a small stipend and help with tuition. Carmen almost turned it down because she thought it was charity. David leaned forward in his chair. Professor Martinez told her something that changed her perspective. He said, "This isn't charity. This is investment. I'm investing in who you're going to become, not paying for who you are right now." Maya felt tears building behind her eyes. What happened? Carmen took the job. She finished her degree, became a teacher, and spent the next 28 years investing in other people the same way Professor Martinez had invested in her. She tutored students after school, bought supplies with her own money when the budget ran short, opened her home to kids who needed a safe place to study. David stood and moved to the window, looking out at Carmen's garden. The night before she died, Carmen made me promise that I would keep investing in people. She said that was how love multiplied, not by hoarding it, but by giving it away. You think she would have approved of this? Of me being here? David turned back to her with a smile that was sad and hopeful at the same time. I think Carmen would have liked you very much. And I think she would have been proud that her husband was brave enough to open his heart again, even in a different way. That night, Maya lay awake thinking about investment versus charity, about the difference between being helped and being used. She thought about her parents' house in Ohio, about the safety of returning to a place where she was known and loved, but where she would always be their little girl who couldn't quite make it on her own. She thought about David's house, about the way he'd started humming while he cooked, about how he'd mentioned that he'd begun looking forward to coming home again. She thought about the substitute teaching job that had turned into a week-long assignment, about the principal who had mentioned that they might have a full-time opening in the spring. Most of all, she thought about Margaret's words, about being someone who took advantage of kindness, and she knew with sudden clarity that she couldn't let fear of other people's opinions rob her of the first real chance she'd had in years. The next morning, Maya knocked on David's bedroom door before he left for his walk. "I want to stay," she said without preamble. "I know it's complicated and I know people might not understand, but I want to make this work. If you'll have me." David's face broke into the first genuinely happy smile she'd seen from him since Margaret's visit. "I was hoping you'd say that, but I want to change our arrangement." David's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I want to pay actual rent. Market rate for a room this size in this neighborhood. And I want to split utilities and groceries down the middle." "Maya, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is." Maya interrupted. "It's necessary for me. I need to know that I'm contributing equally to this household, that I'm not just someone you're taking care of out of the goodness of your heart." David studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I have a condition too." "What?" "I want you to let me help you find a full-time teaching position. I still have connections in the school district, people who might be willing to take a chance on a promising new teacher." Maya felt her breath catch. "You would do that?" "I would do that. Carmen always said that one of the greatest gifts you could give someone was the chance to use their talents in service of something they loved." They shook hands on their new arrangement, a gesture that felt both formal and deeply personal. Maya realized that for the first time since graduating college, she felt like she was building something rather than just surviving. The changes in their relationship were subtle but significant. Maya began cooking more elaborate meals, not because she felt obligated to earn her keep, but because she enjoyed the way David's face lit up when he came home to the smell of something delicious. David helped Maya practice for job interviews, role-playing, difficult questions, and offering feedback on her responses. Most importantly, they began to function as a family of choice, two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were missing. The breakthrough came 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon when Maya was grading papers. At the kitchen table, her phone rang, and the caller ID showed the name of Roosevelt Elementary School. Maya? This is Principal Johnson. I have some good news for you. Maya's heart began to race. She'd interviewed at Roosevelt the previous week for a second-grade position that wouldn't start until after winter break, but they'd told her they were still interviewing candidates. Mrs. Patterson, our second-grade teacher, has decided to take early retirement for health reasons. The position is yours if you want it, starting Monday. Maya nearly dropped the phone. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. When David came home from his volunteer work that evening, he found Maya in the kitchen dancing with a wooden spoon while something that smelled like celebration bubbled on the stove. I take it you got the job? He asked, grinning. I got the job. Maya threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug that surprised them both. I'm going to be a real teacher with my own classroom and everything. Carmen would have been so proud, David said, and Maya could hear the emotion in his voice. That night, they celebrated with the bottle of champagne that Carmen had been saving for a special occasion, the one David had never been able to bring himself to open. As they sat on the back porch watching the first snow of the season begin to fall, Maya realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. David, she said quietly, can I ask you something? Of course. That day in the grocery store, when you offered to help, was it really just coincidence? Or did you see something in me that made you think I was worth the risk? David was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if she'd overstepped somehow. Finally, he spoke. Carmen used to have this theory about divine appointments. She believed that sometimes God or the universe or whatever force guides these things puts people in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. She said the trick was recognizing those moments and having the courage to act on them. He turned to look at Maya in the soft light spilling from the kitchen window. That day in the store, watching you try so hard to maintain your dignity while your world was falling apart, seeing the way you refused to blame anyone else for your circumstances, I knew I was looking at someone who just needed a chance to show what she was capable of. And now I know I was right. David raised his champagne glass. To divine appointments and second chances. To family, Maya added, clinking her glass against his. As the snow continued to fall, Maya thought about the distance between who she had been 6 months ago and who she was becoming. She thought about the girl crying in the grocery store, about the shame of a declined card and the kindness of a stranger who saw past the surface to something worth saving. She thought about Margaret's warnings and her parents' doubts and all the voices that had told her she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to make it on her own. And she realized that they had all been both right and wrong. She wasn't making it completely on her own, but she wasn't supposed to. She was making it with the help of someone who believed in her, someone who had seen her potential before she could see it herself, someone who had invested in her future when she had nothing to offer in return but gratitude and determination. Most importantly, she was learning that accepting help didn't make her weak. It made her part of a community, part of the endless chain of people helping people that kept the world from falling into darkness. The teaching job was everything Maya had dreamed it would be and nothing like she had expected. Her second graders were energetic, curious, challenging, and absolutely exhausting. They tested her patience daily and rewarded her with moments of pure joy that made every difficult day worthwhile. There was Marcus, who struggled with reading but had an intuitive understanding of math that amazed her. There was Sophia, whose parents spoke only Spanish at home and who was determined to master English with a fierce pride that reminded Maya of herself. There was David, not her David, but a 7-year-old David who had been labeled a problem child by previous teachers, but who Maya discovered was simply bored and needed more challenging work. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. Maya found herself staying late to prepare lessons, spending her own money on books and supplies, calling parents to discuss their children's progress. She was doing exactly what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of doing since she was young enough to play school with her stuffed animals. And each evening, she came home to David's house, their house now, to share the stories of her day with someone who understood the particular joys and frustrations of working with young minds. Sophia read an entire chapter book today, she announced one evening in March, bursting through the front door with the enthusiasm of someone who had witnessed a small miracle. The same Sophia who couldn't recognize her own name in September? David asked, looking up from the lesson plans he was reviewing for his guest lecture the following week. The very same. And Marcus solved a multiplication problem that I hadn't even taught yet. He just looked at it and somehow understood the pattern. David smiled. Carmen used to say that teaching was like tending a garden. Some flowers bloom early, some take their time, but they all have their own timeline for showing their beauty. Maya had grown comfortable with David's references to Carmen, had even begun to feel like she knew the woman through the stories he shared. Carmen lived in the spice rack organized exactly the way she had left it, in the well-worn books filled with her marginalia, in the garden that David tended with religious devotion. Sometimes Maya caught herself wondering what Carmen would think of the way her house had changed, of the young woman who now shared her husband's daily life. But those moments of uncertainty had grown fewer as Maya began to understand that there was room for both grief and new life, for honoring the past while embracing the future. It was on a particularly challenging Friday in April that Maya's carefully constructed world shifted again. She had stayed late at school to prepare for parent conferences the following week, and she was driving home in the gathering dusk when her phone rang. "Maya, it's David. I need you to meet me at St. Mary's Hospital." Maya's blood turned to ice. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I need to tell you something when you get here. Can you come now?" Maya made the drive to the hospital, in a state of barely controlled panic, her mind racing through every possible scenario. David had seemed fine that morning, had even mentioned planning to work in the garden over the weekend. But he was 73, and Maya had learned enough about life to know that everything could change in an instant. She found him in the emergency room waiting area, sitting calmly in a plastic chair with a cup of coffee and a slight bandage on his forehead. "What happened?" Maya demanded, rushing to his side. "I'm fine," David said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "I took a small fall while I was volunteering at the literacy center. Hit my head on a bookshelf. They just wanted to check for a concussion." Maya sank into the chair beside him, relief making her legs weak. "You scared me. I know, and I'm sorry. But Maya, that's not why I called you." "What do you mean?" David turned to face her fully. "When I fell, when I thought for a moment that I might be seriously hurt, the first thing I thought about wasn't myself. It was you. I was terrified that something would happen to me, and you'd come home to an empty house with no explanation, no way of knowing what had happened." Maya felt her throat tighten. "David, let me finish," he said gently. "I realize that you've become my emergency contact. Not officially, but in every way that matters. You're the person I want to know if I'm okay, the person I want to take care of things if I can't. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me." David pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "I called my lawyer this afternoon. I want to make some changes to my will, my medical directives, my insurance policies. I want to make sure you're protected if something happens to me." Maya stared at him. "Protected how?" "The house, Maya. I want to leave you the house." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because it's too much. Because I'm not your daughter or your wife or your family. Because people like Margaret will say I manipulated you or took advantage of you." David was quiet for a moment, watching the controlled chaos of the emergency room around them. "Can I tell you what I told the lawyer today?" Maya nodded. "I told him that 2 years ago, I was a man preparing to die. Not physically, but emotionally. I was going through the motions of living without any real investment in the future. I was ready to just fade away." He turned to meet her eyes. "Then I met this young woman in a grocery store who reminded me what courage looked like, who showed me that hope was still possible, that families could be chosen as well as born, that love didn't have to end just because loss had visited. David, you gave me back my life, Maya. You made me remember what it felt like to have someone to worry about, someone to be proud of, someone whose future mattered to me as much as my own. The house is just wood and stone. What you've given me is so much more valuable than anything I could give you in return." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. "What about Margaret? What about Carmen's family? Margaret has her own house, her own family, her own life. Carmen's parents are gone, and she was an only child. There's no one else who would benefit from inheriting this house. But you. You would actually live in it, love it, fill it with the kind of life Carmen always dreamed of. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I need time to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.